a lot of what was in the Dayton Daily News on Sunday and some other facts that we also are aware of. And then I'll spend a little time talking about what we plan to do to clean up what is a clear mess in the Attorney General's office. Start by simply saying that the collections process in the Attorney General's office is clearly a massive pay-to-play operation. And that's been very clear, particularly in the recent story, that well over $1 million has been contributed to the Attorney General from those bidding. Very, very often, those bidding are giving at the very moment they are bidding. Actually, even more troubling than that, since Mike DeWine became Attorney General, the amount being given during the bid window and right around the bid window has gone up every single year. It started out at about $100,000, and now it's the most recent bid cycle this year. It was well over $200,000 was given during the bid process. A number of other facts that were highlighted in the story are equally troubling in the overall collections process, including meetings between Mike DeWine and his chief fundraiser in the middle of the bid process in June of 2012. He met with his chief fundraiser in the AG's office on his official schedule in the middle of the bid process. What were they discussing? Public documents show they were discussing the official list of bidders. Only 2 or 3 weeks later, the decision was made about who would get selected. So bottom line is you have a very troubling set of facts that the entire process of choosing collections counsel is nothing short of a large pay-to-play operation with no standards, no scoring, no evaluations, but a whole lot of lobbying and a whole lot of campaign cash and a whole lot of and a number of meetings where Mike DeWine is not meeting with his official staff to make the decisions, but is actually meeting with his chief fundraiser from 2010. That's point one. Point two is, in 2012, we see what is clearly a classic case study of a rigged bid process. This was the 2012 process of choosing third-party vendors from all facts that we see that were covered again by the Dayton Daily News investigation was clearly rigged on behalf of a donor and a friend in a way that secured that donor a very lucrative assignment for work that donor and the company had never done before, and doing so in a way that beat out numerous very highly qualified current vendors as well as other vendors around the country. This score sheet, frankly, sums it all up. This is the unqualified vendor score sheet. You will see on it not only some very strange results, and we can give you more details later, where a narrative that says the overall number of years in the collection history was limited, but incredibly that led to a 19 out of 20. And only 6 staff members and no accounts at the time, that led to a 24 out of 25. I can show you other score sheets like that where companies that had 80 years of experience got the same 19 or less. But when all was said and done, when you look closely at this score sheet, the score was actually a 94. And if you look at that sheet, that meant the score wasn't good enough to win. So what do you see? You see a number crossed out, a point added here, and all of a sudden a completely unqualified bidder who had never done it before wins the bid, including over 2 other people who scored a 95, who somehow don't get picked, even though this bidder got a 95. This is a rigged bid process. And when you look closely at it, and the story covered it well, how do we know it was rigged in favor of a donor? Because the person who founded this company, by the way, this company, in the sheets over there, it's in your packet, this company was formed 2 days prior to the bid being announced. The articles of corporation, which you have a copy of in your packet, were filed 2 days before the bid was announced. The company had no clients. It had no, as a company, no experience, yet it beats out all these donors. This company the head of it had been meeting with Mike DeWine for more than a year, had given generously to his campaign and to the Republican Party. So what you have here is a classic case study of a rigged bid process, obviously deeply troubling. The final thing I'll say on this set of facts. This behavior has a real cost to taxpayers. let's call it what it is. This is Mike DeWine's corruption tax. And when I say it has a real impact on taxpayers is what has happened since we subbed out people who knew what they were doing with people who had never before done the work. We have seen for the first time in a decade collections not go up but go down. And this is in your packet as well. Every year since 2001, through 9/11, through the recessions, through the growth, one thing you can take to the bank, collections for the Attorney General's office went up every single year. Sometimes 20%, sometimes 15%. The worst year I think was around 2 or 3%. The average was probably around 12%. Until all of a sudden we see this kind of stuff. And after the rigged bid process and after this pay-to-play system that I've just described happened, in Mike DeWine's first full year as Attorney General, where it was his choices that were doing the collections, and that's 2012. It's the first time in 12 years that collections went down. And then they went down one more time. And so there's a real cost to this, and this is what you'd expected if you subbed out people who knew what they were doing with those who had never done it before. You'd have problems. And that's exactly what we have, and we believe the estimate, and people can present different ways, we believe the estimate conservatively of taxes that were unpaid debt or what you name it that was not recovered, that if you had kept going as in the previous trend, if the previous trend had continued, it's at least $100 million lost in taxpayer dollars. Because every year it would go up and all of a sudden it went down. And so there's a real cost to this, to the taxpayers, in unpaid taxes, unpaid debt, and lost funds. So there's at least $100 million Ohio is out of because we replaced people who knew what they were doing with unqualified folks. Now one point that was in the Daily News story that I want to bring out today, and then I'm going to talk for a second about what we're going to do to clean this up, is this email. See, I submit that Selco wasn't qualified when they got the work. But this email shows you they weren't qualified months after they got the work. This is an email, it's in your packet, where on November 21st of 2012, they sent an email back to the Attorney General's office saying, please see the attached out-of-state files which we are not able to work at this time. Why can't they work it? Because it takes licenses to collect unpaid taxes in many states. And so months after being picked through this rigged process, months later, they're still sending back accounts that they aren't able to collect. And they're very excited because you can see it bold, exclamation point, we can now work Michigan files, so send us those. They got approval for one state, but all these other out-of-state collections, they literally are receiving files to collect and they can't even collect them. Because even 6 months later, they are legally unable to do the job they were picked through this process. Now, you want to know why collections go down? It's because of this. You're sending work to people who aren't even legally able to do the job. So we have a collections process that is a massive pay-to-play operation. We have a classic case study of a rigged bid process. And we have what we call a corruption tax, costing taxpayers at least $100 million in funds that should have been collected and that weren't. Now, there are two things we need to do about this. The first is I believe this rigged process in particular should be investigated. If this happened at the local level, it certainly would be investigated by the Attorney General's office, most likely. And if it happens at the state level, it should also be investigated. When you start to see the combination of facts we're talking about here, the changing of scores, the meetings with big donors and their lobbyists, vendors who have clearly more experience not being picked, it's something that should be investigated. I think the Department of Justice should look at this. Frankly, I hope they already are. And the second thing is that we have, as we've done before, a very clear common sense plan to clean this up. Cleaning this up is not rocket science, it's common sense. And we have a plan to do this, and this is again based on talking to people who are frankly in this line of work and know what they're doing and best practices around the country. The first is the key person working in the AG's office to decide who gets the work, and the key person who allocates the work among those who are on the list should be a collections professional. Should be a political appointee. It should be a former lobbyist. It should be someone who isn't sitting around with lobbyists and fundraisers, but actually someone who's crunching the numbers. Because this is the most measurable service I can imagine. And the people who get the work should be the people who actually do it well, and the numbers will tell you who does it well. So let's have someone who makes decisions who actually is a professional with real collections experience and can determine, based on numbers and performance, who actually does the job well and should get the work. Number two is all the decisions will be based on data performance. And again, this is not rocket science. This has got to be one of the easier things you could measure in all of public service, is who collects effectively, who handles the accounts best, who closes the most accounts, and who doesn't. And so we'll come up with a very clear set of criteria, and then we'll continually assess those doing this work to give the people who do it effectively more work. That's what the taxpayers would want. That's what the private sector would do. And there's no reason in the world why this process should be political. It should be based on performance. The third is transparency. Everyone doing work in this way should be listed on the Attorney General's website. I've talked about that before in other areas. Fourth, there should be a blackout period. The idea that, and you have a chart in your packet here, but the idea that every single bid period we see more and more people giving during the bid period is outrageous. Checks coming the same day or 2 days after bids are submitted or 2 days before they're submitted is unacceptable, and we will impose a blackout period on giving anytime near the bid period. And the fifth thing is, and I haven't gotten into this as much, but there's a whole lot of the major meetings that look to be taking place, and Mr. DeWine admitted himself in the Daily News story, was meetings with lobbyists and donors about this work. And I want to make it clear that the people in charge in the AG's office making decisions are making it based on the numbers. So we won't allow lobbying for these companies in the middle of the bid process. The people making decisions will do it based on the numbers, and it won't be a bunch of lobbyists, donors, and fundraisers sitting down with either Attorney General or top staff, which is obviously what happened a couple of years ago, and it seems to happen repeatedly. So there are 5 clear points there in your packet, and we think those steps will clean it up, restore ethics and high integrity of the office, and most importantly, put into place a system that actually means that we're not losing hundreds of millions in uncollected taxes, but actually being far more effective in doing it, because we're putting the people in these jobs that can do it best, and we're actually creating an environment where they compete to do more work because they're good at it and they're collecting more, not because they're giving the most amount of money to the Attorney General, the party, or his Republican friends that are now lobbyists. So with that, I'll wrap up. I'd love to open up to any questions or questions you might have.
Dave, these allegations have followed every Attorney General, at least in my memory, Democrat and Republican. Are you ever really going to get rid of the appearance of impropriety if you don't get rid of the money period from this race, this office?
Absolutely. We have to. This is never, I don't see in the history of Ohio rigged bids like this. You do not see the sheer amount of money we're talking about here, millions. If you look closely at both the collections and the securities areas, there were scoring systems in place with the prior Attorney General. And the Attorney General's office staff got rid of them. And they said in the Daily News, it was too time-consuming. So this idea that, oh, it's always happened this way, it hasn't been pretty. I certainly acknowledge that. This is as worse as it's ever been. They got rid of scoring systems that were in place just 3 years ago. So this is worse than it's ever been. But either way, whatever's happened, we'll clean it up. But we have to clean it up. We're losing a lot of money. But it's bigger than that. If the Attorney General isn't troubled by all this stuff, which apparently he's not, it means you don't have an Attorney General who knows what pay-to-play corruption is and won't aggressively go after it throughout the state. This is the job that's supposed to be cracking down on corruption in government. And if it happens and festers in this obvious, like, over-the-top way in the Attorney General's office, it means that everyone else is going to be doing it too, because the Attorney General has no credibility taking it on. I'll tell you this, if I were Attorney General and this stuff was happening anywhere in Ohio and there were rigged bids and changed numbers, I'd be all over it. And we have an Attorney General right now who says it's no big deal. In fact, I think he said in the story, yeah, it's a factor that this was a friend of mine. I mean, he's a good businessman. Yeah, he never did collections before, and he wasn't even licensed to do the work. So yeah, it has to be cleaned up because the office needs to be above reproach in order to do its job, and right now it's neither.
In your legal opinion, would it be constitutional to prohibit attorneys from contributing to an Attorney
I think it'd be, this came up a couple of years ago in the Medicaid case, and it was found to be unconstitutional. So I think that probably would have constitutional problems. Let me say, and my plans are very clear. People can debate that issue. Whatever the rules are, I believe the Attorney General owes it to the public to make sure that whoever's given, whoever's contributed, didn't get picked because of it. And so whatever happens along those lines, let's say the legislature decides to do it, and I don't think anything will happen, but I believe that the real responsibility in the way you put this all under control is to show that the process you used in selecting people to do work for the office was independent completely of who gave. That's why we put into place, the steps I put into place, the independence, the performance-based, the transparency, the cutting off, the lobbying during the bid, the blackout period, all basically show that whoever gives what doesn't matter in the end. What matters is who's good at this job, and that's who gets the work. And so that point ends up, I think, being less relevant. And by the way, if you do what I just talked about, I think the amount of money flowing in these time periods will disappear because they'll know that has nothing to do with who gets picked. The reason this happens is because everyone who gave in these cycles during the bid window, basically, except for one that I found, got picked. So they know that's how you do it. That's the way the game is played, and you have to do it that way. So it's getting to be more every single year. And you have, over here in your packet, you have the same person who met with Mike DeWine in the middle of the bid period, 2012, reviewing the bids. The next year in the middle of the bid period has a fundraiser, inviting them all to come. What do you think? Of course they know that's the way the game's played. So yeah, it has to be cleaned up.
So can you block or severely limit donations to the state parties? Because it seems like a lot of the money, it doesn't. There already is a limit in place directly to the AG, to the statewide office holder. I think it's a 2-year window, 2,000 or 1,000. Anyway,
yes, 1,000.
There's already a limit. So, but a lot of the money flows through the state parties. So what's your
certainly? I mean,
address that?
You could do that as well. You know, I honestly, if they did that, it makes sense. I will tell you, though, what I'm interested in is not waiting for the legislature to solve these things. You know, the last variation of campaign finance reform, the limits went from 1,000 to 10,000. So I don't have a lot of hope that we're going to see reform there. What I can tell you is the Attorney General in his own office can solve this problem without waiting for legislative changes. If you do the steps I've talked about in this area, if you do the steps I've talked about in the securities area, the money will dry up quickly because people will figure out you can't get the work by giving money. And you can't get the work by hiring lobbyists who happen to be friends of the Attorney General. You get the work because you're good at what you do, and there's a measuring system that tracks if you're good.
Are you at least going to propose that there be a severe, like a $3,000 limit to the parties, to the state parties?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think what I propose will take care of it. I'm happy to look into that one as well. I mean, you know, it's not in my proposal here, but I'm happy to look at that one as well.
What prohibits people from, when you can give outside of the bid period and you're still giving money and you still know that this company is a friend of yours?
What prohibits? The most important step is that you actually have a process that is airtight, that people are selected based upon what if they actually do a good job. So the next, when I'm there, what you will see is a score sheet or more. I mean, this could be much more sophisticated in terms of data. Is a score sheet where you all can see, and the citizens can see, and the competitors can see, they got picked because they're good at what they do. They got picked because they had a higher collection rate than everyone else, or they were in the top 10 and we were picking 10. And frankly, that means that supporting the candidate has nothing to do with why they got picked. You know, I'm not here to say people won't or shouldn't give. Frankly, I hope there's some people who just want a better system. That's what I want. The key to the whole thing is that you create a system that people get picked based on the merits.
Why not pledge not to take money from attorneys? You as a candidate,
right?
It's kind of cool, but you as a candidate definitely have to.
Frankly, because I don't believe in that. I think that there are a lot of attorneys who work for a lot of firms who support me for a lot of reasons, including for the fact that I want to clean up a corrupt system. If you think a lot of attorneys and heads of companies around the state are happy with the current system, A few are, the ones that are benefiting from it, but frankly, most think it's appalling. Most don't want to get phone calls shaking them down for money within months or during the bid process. So I'm not going to cut off people who want a better office. You know, that's just not, that to me is not the solution. The solution is running the office in the right way. But I will tell you, there are many people who I meet with who are in this work who applaud what we're saying because they want to do the work because they're good at it. And they also want candidates who commit to reform this process. And by the way, business leaders want the same thing. Business leaders who are, I've talked to business leaders, to the chamber and others, the idea that people get hired by the AG's office based on contributions troubles the business community as well. Other thoughts?
We have time for maybe 2 more questions.
David, is this issue strong enough to have legs to the election, or do you think the average voter in Ohio will just see this as one candidate criticizing another candidate? How do you bring this home to the average voter in Ohio?
Let me say, this should not be, I mean, this was an investigation by the Daily News. These are public records. These are facts. This isn't a and every time I talk like this, it turns out the next day that it's some kind of a personal attack. These are simply public records and facts. I think that's how they should be covered. Other types of corruption are covered just like that. But I'm telling you, if this were a story in a local government where bids were picked by county commissioners based on rigged scoring sheets and it turns out that people didn't even know what they were doing or had the legal authority, this should not be covered as one politician saying this happened. This should be covered as, these are the facts. This is what's happened. And I believe you will have a simple choice in the election. Do you want an Attorney General who not only does this stuff and thinks it's okay, or do you want one who thinks there's something wrong with all this? If you think it's okay, then guess what? Welcome to Ohio, where every city and county in this state does the same stuff. Because if the Attorney General signals, you can change the bid. Yeah, I give a little more credit to a friend because I know he's a good businessman. And it's okay that we're losing all this money. We went through the process. It was just too time-consuming to actually have scoring after 2012. You know, if that's what people want, then it doesn't have legs. But if people want an Attorney General who says, all this stuff is horrendous, this should not be happening in 2014 in the state of Ohio, and it shouldn't happen especially in the Attorney General's office, because this is the job that's supposed to take this stuff on when it happens everywhere. And again, I'm not presenting anything here that isn't documented absolutely with public documents that comes out of long investigations from obviously credible newspapers, but everything here is a fact. It's not an accusation to say that this bid was changed by the exact point it was needed to beat out other competitors. That's just a fact, folks. This is the story, not what I'm saying. This is the story right here. And certainly I hope that voters by November figure out that they'd rather have an Attorney General who thinks this is far from good enough, but actually hugely problematic, should be investigated, should be reformed and fixed, than one who says what he said on Sunday, which is, it's all fine. Everything's okay. Sure, this is someone we helped a little bit, but that's a factor for us.
David, Laura's story even mentioned that there were those that gave no money, that also received contracts. Does that, if the fact that that occurred, does that legitimize the rest of this, or is that something that's done to legitimize the rest of this?
I can't explain that. There's a whole other layer to this that Laura's story didn't get into and that I haven't gone into, and that is the overlap between, this is that last point I made, between who gets hired as a lobbyist and who gets work. And the other connection, besides all the money flowing and the timing of the money, the other connection, if you look closely, is if someone hasn't given, my guess is if you look closely, they've hired someone who is very close to Attorney General. And that's why they get picked. So I think there may be someone in there who actually happens to be good at what they do, and great. I hope they're on there. I hope they're working hard. That's a good thing. But if it's 1 out of 5 that are there only because of that, and everyone else is some kind of either financial connection, lobbyist connection, that's troubling. So when folks haven't given, I think in a lot of cases you'll find some other connection. But if there are a handful that actually are there because they're good at what they do, great, I'll celebrate it. My pledge is that they'll all be like that when I'm there, not just a handful.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you all very much. Appreciate it.